What would you do if the person you sacrificed everything for was the one who killed you? Today's manhwa is absolutely insane. We're talking about an assassin so powerful. He has 92% compatibility with dark magic. Something never seen before in history. And when he returns to the academy that once looked down on him, let's just say, everyone is about to learn what true fear means. This is the Reborn young lord as an assassin, and trust me, you do not want to skip this. Before we dive into this absolute masterpiece, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe for daily and hit that notification bell, because this channel brings you the best regression stories on YouTube. Now, let's get into it. Our story begins with the Cyan Vert, the continent's most feared assassin, the man who worked in the shadows for 27 years. The hidden blade of the prestigious Vert family stands face to face with death itself. But here's the twist that'll blow your mind. The one holding the blade? His own brother, Cyan Vert, the so-called hero of the continent. The man Cyan spent his entire life supporting. Picture this. Cyan Vert, at 37 years old, has given up everything. His identity, his dreams, his very existence. All to make sure his older brother Cyan could shine as the guardian of the continent. While Cyan basked in glory and admiration, Cyan operated in complete darkness, eliminating threats, handling the dirty work, making impossible decisions that would haunt any normal person. He was there during the imperial throne struggle, taking out enemies before they could even threaten the family. He was instrumental in suppressing the demon army invasions, his blade cutting through horrors that would make veteran warriors freeze in terror. And during the war for continental unification, Cyan was the phantom that turned the tide of countless battles. Yet nitrogen monoxide, one knew his name. But paranoia is a terrible thing. As Cyan's power grew, so did his fear. What if Cyan, this incredibly skilled assassin who knew all the family secrets, what if he became a threat? What if he wanted the power for himself? So in a moment that defines betrayal, Cyan made his choice. His own brother, the man who had been his shadow, his sword, his everything. To die, Cyan didn't even fight back. Not because he couldn't, but because even at the end, part of him still held on to that brotherhood. Is this really happening? He thought, as the blade pierced through his chest. After everything I've done, this is how it ends. His final moments weren't filled with rage or regret about his brother. No, his regret was much deeper. I lived my entire life as someone else's shadow. I never had a life of my own. As darkness consumed his vision and his blood pooled beneath him, Cyan Vert, the continent's greatest assassin, died, unknown, unappreciated, and utterly alone. His last thought, if I could do it over, I would live for myself. But here's where our story really begins, because death wasn't the end for Cyan Vert. Oh no, something extraordinary was about to happen. Cyan's eyes snapped open, but something was wrong. The ceiling above him wasn't the cold ground where he died. It was his childhood bedroom. His hands, they were small. A child's hands. What? What is this? His mind raced. The memories of his 37 years were crystal clear. The assassinations, the battles, the betrayal. But his body, he was 10 years old again. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't an illusion. Cyan Vert had regressed. 27 years into the past. Back to before everything went wrong. Back to when he was still considered the incompetent youngest son of Duke Wallace Vert. Most people would panic. Most people would question their sanity. But Cyan was an assassin. A professional. His mind immediately began calculating. This is real. I don't know how, and I don't know why. But I've been given a second chance. And I'll be damned if I waste it. See, in his previous life, young Cyan had been weak, timid, desperate for approval. He had taken every insult, every mockery, every dismissal with his head down. He had believed that if he just worked hard enough, if he just supported his family enough, they would eventually see his worth. But now Cyan had the mind of a master assassin in the body of a child. He had knowledge of the future, who would betray whom, which events would shape the continent, where dangers lurked. And most importantly, he had zero intention of living in anyone's shadow ever again. Let me paint you a picture of what Cyan's situation looked like. The Vert family wasn't just any noble family. Duke Wallace-Berth Sion's father was known as the protector of the continent, a military genius whose magical power and strategic brilliance had held back demon invasions time and time again. Cyan's eldest brother, Aishel, was basically the golden child, charismatic, talented in both magic and swordsmanship, beloved by everyone, the heir apparent who could do no wrong. Then there was Elis, Cyan's oldest sister, who had graduated at the top of the Royal Academy. She was brilliant, powerful, and carried the weight of being called a guardian herself. And then there was Cyan. Or at least, the OLD Cyan. The youngest son who tested poorly in magic, the quiet one who seemed to have no particular talents. The family embarrassment, even the servants, looked down on him. In his past life, this treatment had broken him, shaped him into someone who would do anything to prove his worth Baptiste time. This time, Cyan, Knew. The truth, he wasn't weak. He had the potential to become the continent's deadliest assassin. He just needed to unlock it earlier. As Cyan sat in his childhood room, feeling the small body he now inhabited, he made several decisions that would change everything. 1. He would never again sacrifice his own life for someone else's glory. If Asha wanted to be a hero, he could do it without Cyan's invisible support. 2. He would master his abilities properly this time. In his previous life, he'd stumbled into becoming an assassin through desperation and circumstance. This time, he would actively pursue power. 3. He would uncover the truth. Why did Ashel really betray him? What secrets was the Vert family hiding? And most importantly, who could he actually trust? 4. He would live. Actually live. Not as a shadow, not as a tool, but as Cyan Vert, on his own terms. But Cyan was smart. He couldn't just suddenly become a different person overnight. That would raise too many questions. No, he needed to be strategic. Calculate every move, show growth, but make it seem ... believable. The first thing he did. Physical training. You see, in his past life, Cyan had an S-grade physique once he fully developed. His body was naturally suited for combat, but he'd wasted years before realizing this. Not this time. While everyone else in the Verte household was asleep, young Cyan began training in secret. Push-ups, sword forms, endurance exercises. His child's body screamed in protest, but his assassin's mind pushed through. Pain is temporary. Weakness is forever. He also began reviewing everything he knew about the future. Key events, dangerous situations, opportunities for power, the upcoming academy entrance, the monsters that would soon appear, the political machinations of the empire. But Cyan knew he needed to be careful. Showing too much knowledge could expose his regression. He needed to seem talented, maybe even gifted, but not impossible. Walk that fine line between impressive and suspicious. And here's something critical that Cyan didn't know yet, but would soon discover. His regression had changed something fundamental about him. In his past life, he had an 84% affinity for darkness magic, already extremely rare and powerful. But now, something had shifted. Maybe it was the regression itself. Maybe it was the mist entity that would later bond with him. Maybe it was fate. But Cyan's darkness affinity had increased to 92%. To put this in perspective, in the entire history of the Royal Academy, no one had ever recorded above 85% in any element. Dark magic users were already rare and discriminated against, but 92%, that was unprecedented. Impossible. Unheard of. This wasn't just talent. This was something that would shake the very foundations of the Empire's understanding of magic. And when it was revealed, the shockwaves would be insane. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before that world-shaking revelation, Cyan had to deal with his first major challenge, and it came from within his own family. One night, about a week after his regression, Cyan experienced something that would change everything. He woke up not in his bed, but in a place that seemed to exist between dreams and reality. Dark mist swirled around him, thick and oppressive, yet somehow ... familiar. And then he appeared. Or rather, she. A presence within the mist. Ancient. Powerful. Hungry. You ... I remember you. The voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. The one who wielded me in the future that hasn't happened yet. The one whose rage and despair fed me so deliciously. Cyan's assassin instincts kicked in immediately. He analyzed the threat, calculated escape routes, prepared for combat. But then he realized something. This entity wasn't hostile. Not exactly. This was Karam. Or more precisely, the essence that would one day form the demonic sword Karam. In his past life, Cyan had found and bonded with this weapon much later, after years of dark magic training. But the regression had created a paradox. Karam remembered their future bond. You seek power, the entity whispered. You seek revenge. You seek to carve your own path. I can help you. But there will be a price. Old Cyan might have hesitated. Old Cyan might have feared the darkness. But this can. He'd already lived through the worst possible outcome. What did he have to lose? What kind of price? Cyan asked, his voice steady, despite being a 10-year-old child. Your rage, your pain, your darkness. Feed me these emotions, and I will grant you power beyond imagination. We will become one. Your darkness affinity will soar. Your physical abilities will transcend human limits. Together, we will become unstoppable. Cyan considered this. In his past life, his bond with Karam had been one of mutual benefit. The entity fed on his negative emotions, and God knows he had plenty of those, while giving him incredible power. It was a symbiotic relationship. I accept, Cyan said without hesitation. But understand this. I'm not your puppet. We're partners. Equals. You help me achieve my goals, and I'll feed you enough darkness to satisfy you for 1,000 years. The mist erupted with what might have been laughter. Yes, you're different this time. Stronger. More ruthless. I like it. Very well, Cyan Vert. Let us reshape destiny together. The mist slammed into Cyan's small body. It felt like being struck by lightning, drowning in an ocean, and burning in fire all at once. His darkness affinity, already increased by the regression, began to surge. 84% became 85%. Then 86%. The numbers climbed higher and higher. 88%. Cyan gritted his teeth against the pain. His body was being fundamentally altered, his very essence intertwining with this ancient entity. 91%. 92%. And then it stopped. Cyan collapsed, gasping for breath, but he could feel it. The power coursing through him. The darkness responding to his will like an extension of his own body. This wasn't just magic anymore. This was something more. 92%, the entity whispered, satisfaction in its voice. The highest darkness affinity in recorded history. You are now something unprecedented. Cyan Vert. A darkness incarnate. How delicious. Over the next few weeks, Cyan trained like a demon. And I mean that literally. He would spend his days maintaining the image of the improving youngest son, showing gradual progress that would unraise suspicions. But at night, he would dive deep into his mindscape and train with the mist entity. The techniques came back naturally. His muscle memory from 27 years of assassinations was ungone. It was just locked away in a body too young to properly execute them. So Cyan focused on rebuilding his foundation, stronger than before. The mist sword techniques were particularly important. These were just normal sword forms. They were combat styles that channeled dark magic through blade work, creating devastating combinations of physical and magical attacks. First form, Phantom Strike. His blade would become nearly invisible, coated in darkness, striking from angles that seemed impossible. Third form, Void Step. His body would partially phase with shadows, allowing impossible dodges and repositioning. Ninth form, Summon Karem. This was the ultimate technique, manifesting the demonic sword itself from within his own body, a blade forged from pure darkness and bloodlust. In his past life, Cyan had mastered up to the 7th form before his death. But now, with his enhanced darkness, affinity, and early start, he aimed to master all 9 forms before even entering the academy. Now, you might be wondering, why was the Royal Academy so important? Let me explain the world's power structure. In the Yushif Empire, magical talent determined everything. Your social status, your career options, your very worth as a person. And the Royal Academy was where the Empire's future leaders were trained and identified. Graduating from the Royal Academy as a top student basically guaranteed you a position of power and influence. Military leadership, court mage, positions, noble alliances through marriage, all of it flowed from the Academy. But here's the thing. The Academy had a BIAS, a huge one. Light magic was revered. Fire, water, earth, and wind were respected. But darkness was associated with demons, with evil, with everything the Empire fought against. Dark magic users faced discrimination, suspicion, and outright hostility. They were usually relegated to intelligence gathering or assassination work roles that were necessary but not respected. So when Cyan, the incompetent youngest son of the Vert family, would eventually test at 92% darkness affinity, the Academy wasn't going to roll out a welcome mat. No, they were going to see him as a threat. A potential demon sympathizer, something to be monitored and controlled. But Cyan knew this. He'd lived through it once, and this time, he was ready to face the prejudice. Cyan's preparation wasn't just about magic training, though. He also needed to handle more immediate problems. You see, in the Vert household, there was a pecking order, and Cyan, as the supposedly weakest son, was at the bottom. His half-brother Kronz, in particular, loved to make Cyan's life miserable. Bullying, public humiliation, even physical violence when no one was looking. In his past life, Cyan had endured this treatment silently, believing it would eventually stop if he just proved his worth. Spoiler, it never stopped. It only got worse until Cyan left for his first military deployment. But this time Cyan had a master assassin's skills, enhanced dark magic, and absolutely zero patience for bullying. And very soon, Krenz was going to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating people. Transition dramatic build, the opportunity came sooner than expected, and it would be the first public display of just how much Cyan had changed. It was a regular morning in the Vert estate. The family was gathered for breakfast, a formal affair where Duke Wallace Vert expected all his children to display proper noble etiquette and discuss their training progress. Cyan sat quietly, eating his meal and observing. His sister Ellis was discussing her recent magical research. Ashel was charming everyone with stories of his latest accomplishments. And Kranz was being his usual insufferable self. "Father," Kranz said with fake concern dripping from his voice, "I'm worried about Cyan. He's been disappearing a lot lately. Sneaking around." It's most unbecoming of a Vert family member. All eyes turned to Cyan. In his past life, this moment had happened similarly. Cyan had stammered, made excuses, looked weak. It had resulted in harsh punishment and increased surveillance. But this time, Cyan simply set down his utensils, looked Kranz directly in the eye, and said calmly, "I've been training. Something you might consider doing more of, brother?" The room went silent. Did Cyan just talk, Biake? Kranz's face turned red. "What did you say to me, you little?" I said. Cyan interrupted, his voice still perfectly calm. "That perhaps you should spend less time worrying about where I am, and more time improving your own pathetic swordsmanship." Boom! The table practically exploded with tension. Ellis's eyes widened in surprise. Asha's eyebrows raised with interest. And Duke? Wallace. The Duke was watching Cyan with an expression that was hard to read. Kranz shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. "You dare." "Fine. If you think you're so skilled now, let's settle this properly. I challenge you to a duel, right now. In noble families, formal duels were serious business. They were binding, witnessed, and used to establish hierarchy. Kranz was expecting Cyan to back down, to apologize, to show weakness. That was the old Cyan's pattern. Instead, Cyan stood up slowly, his expression unchanging. "I accept." 20 minutes later, the entire Vert household had gathered in the training grounds. Word had spread fast. The incompetent youngest son was going to duel Kranz. This was going to be a massacre. The training ground was a wide courtyard with a magically reinforced dueling circle. Duke Wallace sat in the observation area, his expression stern. Ellis stood nearby, looking worried. Ashiel watched with curious interest. Kranz entered the circle first, his sword already drawn and a confident smirk on his face. He was 14 years old, had been training seriously for years, and had awakened a decent fire affinity against a 10-year-old who'd been considered hopeless until recently. This should be EASY. Then Cyan entered, and several people gasped. His expression was completely different from usual. Gone was any trace of timidity or uncertainty. His eyes were cold. Calculating. The eyes of someone who'd killed more people than most soldiers would ever meet. "Before we begin," the officiating knight announced, "this is a formal duel under Vert, family law. First blood or yield determines the winner. Lethal techniques are forbidden. Are both parties ready?" "Ready," Kranz said, his sword beginning to glow with fire magic. "Ready?" Cyan said quietly, his hand resting on his practice sword's hilt. "Begin." Kranz didn't hesitate. He immediately launched a fire-enhanced strike, his blade trailing flames as he aimed for Cyan's shoulder. It was a painful but non-lethal blow, one designed purely to humiliate. And honestly, for a 14-year-old, it was a genuinely impressive attack. The form was good, the magic integration was proper, and the power was appropriate. Any other kid his age would have been on the ground, clutching a scorched shoulder. But Cyan didn't even blink. He just shifted his weight, a subtle, almost lazy movement. Kranz's flaming blade sliced through the air, passing inches from his body and hitting absolutely nothing. Kranz's eyes widened in disbelief. What was all he managed to get out before his world turned upside down? Cyan Vert. To everyone watching from the sidelines, it looked like he just took a single, simple step forward. But to Kranz, it was like a monster had materialized directly in his face, a terrifying, unstoppable force of nature. Before he could even react, there was a sharp, sickening crack. Cyan's sword had slammed into Kranz's wrist with surgical precision. The practice blade wasn't sharp, but the force and the accuracy were devastating. It was a perfect nerve strike. Kranz's sword went flying from his numb, useless hand, but Cyan wasn't done. Not even close. In the very same fluid motion, his leg swept out, hooking Kranz's feet from under him. Kranz fell hard, landing flat on his back with a loud thud that knocked the wind completely out of his lungs. He gasped for air that wouldn't come, his vision swimming. Before anyone in the stunned crowd could even process what had just happened, Cyan's blade was resting gently, almost mockingly, at Kranz's throat. The cold steel was a stark contrast to the heat of the failed fire attack. Just moments before, the entire fight had lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Dead silence descended upon the training grounds. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The servants, the knights, even the Duke himself, were all just trying to process the impossible scene they had just witnessed. Cyan, the supposedly incompetent, magically inept, weak youngest son of the family, had just utterly and completely destroyed Kranz, a trained combatant who was 4 years his senior, and he'd done it in less time than it takes to blink. The sheer disparity was mind-boggling. It didn't make sense. Lying on the ground, staring up at the impassive face of his younger brother, Kranz finally managed to choke out 2 words. "I yield." His voice was hoarse, his face pale with shock, and was that fear? Yes. It was undeniable fear. Cyan stepped back, lowering his sword. His expression hadn't changed at all. There was no triumph, no arrogance, no satisfaction. Just a calm, detached focus. He turned, gave a respectful bow to his father, and said, "The duo is complete, father." Then, as if nothing of consequence had occurred, he turned to walk away. "Wait." The voice cracked through the silence like a whip. Everyone froze. It was Duke Wallace. He stood up slowly from his seat, his eyes locked on Cyan with a burning intensity that made several of the nearby servants take an involuntary step back. The Duke, a man whose presence alone commanded respect and fear, descended the steps to the dueling circle. Each step was deliberate, measured, and heavy with unspoken questions. He stopped directly in front of his youngest son, studying his face for a long, tense moment, as if seeing him for the very first time. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Where," he asked, "did you learn to fight like that?" This was the critical moment, the turning point. Cyan knew he couldn't reveal the truth, that he had lived this life before, that he was a regressor from a future where he became a master assassin. He couldn't expose his true, terrifying capabilities, but at the same time, he couldn't go back to being seen as weak. The act was over. He needed to find that perfect balance, a plausible explanation that would secure his new position without giving away his secret. He met the Duke's piercing gaze without flinching. "I've been training secretly, father," Cyan said, his voice steady and clear. "I know what everyone thinks of me. I know I'm considered incompetent. The family disappointment." He let the words hang in the air, a truth they had all accepted for years. "So I decided to stop complaining about it, and actually do something about it." He continued, the conviction in his voice growing stronger. "For months, I've been studying the sword techniques from the family library. I've been practicing in the early mornings, before anyone else is awake. I've been conditioning my body, pushing myself until I collapse. I'm tired of being weak. I'm tired of being looked down on." He stood a little taller. "I'm a Vert, and it's time I started acting like one." It was a brilliant half-truth. He was leaving out the most important part, the decades of future experience, but the raw determination in his voice. That was 100% genuine. That was the core of who he was now. Duke Wallace's stern expression remained, but something new flickered in his eyes. Was it respect? Pride, perhaps. It was impossible to tell with a man like him. He stared at Cyan for another long moment, processing the confession. Finally, he posed another question, a test. "How long can you maintain that level of precision?" "Hours," Father Cyan replied without a hint of hesitation. The Duke's eyebrows rose, whose slightly. It was the only crack in his stoic facade. For someone so young to claim such an extreme level of endurance and focus was almost unbelievable. It hinted at a level of physical and mental discipline far beyond his years. "Show me your mana control," the Duke commanded, his gaze unyielding. The real test was about to begin. Cyan nodded and extended his hand. Now, for the tricky part. He couldn't just unleash his full power. that 92% darkness affinity not. Yet, that bombshell needed to drop at the academy for maximum chaos. But he could show them a little taste. Dark mist began to swirl around Cyan's palm. Just a small, controlled amount, but even that tiny flicker of darkness made several people in the room flinch and step back. The Duke observed, his voice a flat, neutral tone. Darkness element. How long have you known? I awakened it a few weeks ago. Cyan replied. It was technically true. If he counted regressing to his past self as an awakening, I understand darkness magic is ... uncommon. But it's what I have, so I'll master it. Duke Wallace stared at the dark mist for a moment longer, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. Ellis, test his magical capacity. Ellis stepped forward, surprise written all over her face. She raised a hand. And a complex, glowing magical circle materialized in the Arahilable. Diagnostic spell used to measure a mage's raw power and their control over it. The circle scanned Cyan, its light pulsing and growing brighter and brighter as it crunched the numbers. Ellis's eyes went wide. Father, his mana capacity is... It's at least 3 times what it should be for someone his age. And his control, it's like he's been training for years. The training ground fell silent. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see how the Duke would react to the revelation that his so-called incompetent son was actually a hidden prodigy. After a long, tense moment, Duke Wallace finally spoke. Cyan, from today forward, you will train with the family's elite guard. You will have access to the advanced technique scrolls in the restricted section of the library, and you will attend the Royal Academy's entrance exam next month. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The Academy entrance exam was notoriously difficult. Most noble kids spent years cramming for it, and many still failed spectacularly. Cyan had supposedly only been training seriously for a few months. Was the Duke setting his own son up for public failure? But Cyan simply bowed. Thank you, Father. I won't disappoint you. As he walked away, he could feel everyone's eyes locked on him, especially his brother Ashel's. Ashel watched him with an unreadable expression, a mix of curiosity, concern, and maybe even suspicion. Interesting, Ashel murmured to himself. Very interesting indeed. Later, alone in his room, Cyan finally allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. Phase 1 was complete. He had successfully established himself as talented but not suspiciously overpowered. Now, instead of dismissing him, his family would actively support his entry into the academy. The old Cyan would have been over the moon for his father's approval, but this wasn't for him. This was for himself. The mist entity, the source of his power, stirred in his mind. Your brother Ash, he's watching you now. Closely. Good, Cyan thought back. Let him watch. He has no idea what he's looking at. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. The duel had sent ripples through the noble circles. Word spread like wildfire that the Vert family's useless youngest son had suddenly displayed incredible skill. Speculation ran rampant. Was he a late bloomer? Had he been hiding his power all along? But the real shockwave was yet to come. In 3 weeks, Cyan would take the Royal Academy entrance exam, and when his 92% darkness affinity was revealed, the entire empire was about to lose its mind. The journey to the academy was buzzing with anticipation. Young nobles from all over the empire gathered, preening and sizing each other up. Cyan, with his family's now tarnished reputation, was an easy target for mockery. But he paid them no mind. His focus was singular. The entrance exam consisted of multiple stages, but the one that mattered most was the mana aptitude test. One by one, students placed their hands on a large crystal orb, which would measure their elemental affinity and mana capacity. When it was Cyan's turn, he calmly stepped forward. The moment his hand touched the crystal, it didn't just glow, it turned pitch black. A terrifying, oppressive aura filled the hall. The instructors' jaws dropped. The display panel flickered wildly before settling on a number that made everyone question their sanity. Darkness affinity, 92%. The hall erupted into chaos. 92%. An affinity that high was unheard of, legendary even, and for it to be the reviled darkness element. It was a scandal. It was a miracle. It was terrifying. Prejudice flared up immediately. Students whispered. Instructors argued. But the rules were the rules. Cyan had passed with the highest score in the Academy's history. He was in his first classes. He didn't just excel. He dominated. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, and his practical skills, honed by a lifetime of assassination, were leagues beyond his peers. He even caught the eye of Silica, a notoriously strict and powerful instructor, who saw past the prejudice and recognized the terrifying potential simmering beneath his calm exterior. While Cyan was making waves at the Academy, the secrets of the Vert family began to unravel. The Duke's coldness wasn't just disappointment. It was a desperate attempt to protect Cyan from a hidden threat connected to demons plaguing the Empire. His sister, Ellis, digging into old records, started to piece together fragments of Cyan's secret regression. And Ashel, his ever-watchful brother, began to make his own moves, his political machinations, weaving a complex web of intrigue. Cyan had to navigate not just the cutthroat Academy life, but the dangerous political games of his own family, all while knowing a demonic threat loomed on the horizon. His new life was put to the test during a practical training exercise outside the Academy walls. A group of students, including Princess Erin of the Empire, was ambushed by a horde of powerful demons. While the other students panicked, Cyan moved. This was his element. He unleashed his mist sword techniques for the first time. Not the watered-down versions he'd shown before, but the deadly, efficient art of an assassin. He became a phantom, a whisper of death moving through the chaos. He single-handedly turned the tide, decimating the demons and saving Princess Erin. The event earned him a fearsome reputation and the gratitude of the royal family. It also bonded him with his loyal maid, Nana, who witnessed his true power and swore even deeper loyalty. But fame is a double-edged sword. His meteoric rise attracted assassins sent by rival factions, forcing him to demonstrate his ever-growing power just to survive. With each battle, each political maneuver, Cyan was strategically placing his pieces on the board. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was proactively shaping the future, using his knowledge of what was to come. He began to investigate the true reasons for his betrayal in his past life, forming unlikely alliances with those who could help him uncover the truth. He clashed with the powerful and corrupt Gera Magic Society, making powerful enemies but also proving he was a force to be reckoned with. His goals were evolving. It was no longer just about revenge. It was about preventing the future he knew was coming and protecting the few people he had come to care about. And that is how the continent's greatest assassin returned to reshape his destiny. From a betrayed shadow to a force that makes even his enemies nervous, Cyan Vert's journey is just getting started. We've seen him dominate his family, shatter records at the Academy, and start building the foundation for a completely new future. But there is so much more to come: the real confrontation with Ashel, the truth about the demon invasion, and the final, epic revenge against those who wronged him. If you enjoyed this recap, absolutely destroy that like button. Subscribe for more amazing story breakdowns, and drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Should I do a part to covering the next major arc? Let me know down below. The official manhwa is titled The Reborn Young Lord is an Assassin, so be sure to check it out to support the creators. Until next time, keep reading, and remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. They might just be waiting for the right moment to strike. Peace.